Welcome to Careers in Discovery, your window into the world of biotech leaders. On each episode, we interview the industry's leading executives to understand how they built their careers, what they've learned along the way, and the advice they'd give to their younger selves. This week on Careers in Discovery, we're going to do something a little bit different. So after this episode, we're going to take a very hard-earned end-of-season break. The team who put this podcast together have been going relentlessly for the last couple of years. I particularly want to give a shout-out to Kate Gabe-Jones, who does all of our editing and production and social media content. She's been working very, very hard to get this podcast to you every week. I've been hosting Careers in Discovery for 6 years now, and it's been a huge amount of fun. But after this episode, I'm going to be handing the baton over to Tyler Olding, who's one of my colleagues here at Singular. I'll probably be back from time to time, but to introduce you to Tyler, we decided to use this episode to turn the tables. So this week, I'm going to be the guest, and we're going to be diving into my career in biotech over the last 20 years. See you in there.
Welcome back to Careers in Discovery. You may not have heard my voice before, so I'm Tyler, a Principal Talent Executive here at Singular, and today we're doing something slightly different. So the tables have turned, and I'll be interviewing founder and CEO Tom Froggatt. Many listeners know you as the face behind over 100 of these very episodes. Also the founder and CEO of both Singular and more recently Vesapia. Welcome, and I'd love to hear more.
Thanks. That was weird seeing that the other way around.
Yeah, it was.
So I guess some of the people listening to this will know a bit about me. Probably not that much because we don't tend to talk about it. But yeah, I run two companies, as you pointed out. Singular is biotech search, talent, and leadership development business. So there we have been working over the last 6.5 years to help biotech companies build brilliant teams. Essentially, we work with companies that are really at the cutting edge of human health science, whether that's in therapeutics, in diagnostics, or whatever it is they might be doing. And our sort of thesis with that company is that the team that you build is the key differentiator between success and failure. And so we've developed an approach and a series of methodologies over the years to help companies assemble those really great teams. And more recently, we've been helping them to develop the emerging leaders in their business, to give them the key skills they need to manage and lead effectively. And part of that has been hosting the Careers in Discovery podcast, which we're now flipping around a little bit, which has been running for almost the same amount of time as the company. We've been going for 6 years now, and over 200 episodes, and we've had some incredible people on, and it's been definitely one of the highlights of the role for me, people sharing their stories, and I'm really pleased to be able to do the same, and hopefully people find it interesting. I'm not a scientist, I don't run a biotech company, but hopefully I can provide a bit of value there. And then more recently, we've started a second company called Vesapia, which kind of spun out of the work we were doing at Singular. So more and more we'd been getting into not just how do you build the team, but how do you build the environment and the culture that drives performance. And we've done some very interesting work with companies on that. We've developed a framework and a set of principles that the best companies in the world use to develop high performance culture. And at Vesapia, we're combining that with the incredibly fast moving power of AI to build a platform, an operating system, if you will, for high performance culture that's designed for science, tech, and innovation driven companies. So I'm sitting across both of those companies at the moment, and with heavy heart and in a bittersweet moment, handing over hosting responsibilities for Careers in Discovery to you, Tyler.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, well, I'll try not to disappoint too much, but no, I'm certainly looking forward to it. I suppose I think it would be really interesting just to hear a little bit more about what your plans are with Singular and how that will evolve throughout this year. Certainly given the fact that Vasapi has kind of spun out of them as well.
Yeah. Well, I think it's a really interesting time at Singular because obviously the biotech market's been in a challenging place for some time, and we've been doing fine. But I think we're at a kind of turning point in the market where we are starting to see some green shoots coming through, but it is still difficult. A lot of companies are struggling to raise money. There are still restructurings and downsizings and redundancies going on, and I think that's probably going to continue for a little while. I don't think we have a clear path, or we do have a clear path, but I don't think we have a fast path out of the difficult market that we're in, but we are starting to head in the right direction. But the other thing that's sort of changing, I think, is that the political and regulatory landscape is evolving pretty rapidly, but also the role of technology in drug development, in diagnostic development, in science as a whole is shifting as well. And so I think broadly, I think companies in the future will be smaller. But actually, I think that makes it more important to build a core team of the right people. And so our goal over the next 6 to 12 months is to really focus in on helping companies to identify that really key talent that they need on the search and talent side of the business to make sure that they're building effective teams, even if those teams are a little bit smaller. And I think we're seeing some interesting things in that light, in that although there are still people available in the market and there are still people who are looking for work and have made themselves available, I think a lot of people are starting to find new roles, and then you're left with people who weren't affected by restructurings or downsizings, who are kind of understandably cautious and who are kind of, if they've got a job that they don't absolutely hate, are kind of sticking with that, understandably, having seen people be out of work for some time. So I think it poses a kind of unique challenge for companies in that, yes, the volume of hiring is probably not going to be as high. The competition's not going to be quite as intense for talent, but it's going to be harder for them to pry the right people away from their existing employers. So we're focusing really on helping companies to do that. The other thing that we're doing is really scaling our leadership academy. So we've seen a lot of success in the first half of the year in helping emerging leaders to develop those fundamental leadership skills, especially those from a scientific and technical background. And we're moving into cohort 3 of that now, where we're going to have another group of people taking part in the program. And I think this is something that is creating a lot of additional value for companies, and the quality of leadership is absolutely key to how well they're able to execute on what they're doing. And so that's the other thing that we're really focusing on in the second half of the year.
I suppose, especially from the conversations that I've had, people can realistically, off the back of a PhD, move into a leadership position within biotech over the space of 3-4 years. And so that kind of adaptability happens incredibly fast. What kind of tools does that leadership program help give people in that kind of much faster environment?
I think that's a really important point. It can happen very quickly, and managing people is one of those things that actually, regardless of the training that you have, you kind of learn by experience, right? So doing that in a very short space of time is difficult, but there are tools that can accelerate that journey, and so that's what we try and help people to develop. And there's a few areas that we tend to focus on in the program. We look at what kind of leader do you want to be? So helping people to understand that, so that they can shape their own development in the way that they want to be perceived and be effective as a leader. We look at things like leadership styles. We look at how the principles of running teams. We have 2 modules that are centered on high performance teams, so recruitment and onboarding, training, coaching, aligning people, performance management, all the kind of nuts and bolts of how you run an effective team. We do some work around influencing people, which is a core leadership skill, not just the people in your team, but the people around and above you and outside the organization. And that's an area that the people who take part in the course seem to really enjoy. We spend time on how to approach difficult conversations or challenging situations. We do work around decision making. There's a whole bunch of different things. So there's 10 sessions, 8 core modules. We cover quite a lot in the program. It's 24, 25 hours of content. But yeah, those things, if you can get those things right, I think that's the key thing. You know, everybody wants to be an inspirational leader, and that's important. But really key to inspiration is kind of having those core building blocks of alignment, managing people's performance, understanding the people on your team, helping to develop them, helping them to grow. And then, you know, part of leadership is having difficult conversations, making tough decisions, and you've got to develop those skills as well. So I think, you know, I think scientists are kind of better positioned to do this stuff than they might realize. They develop a lot of transferable skills, particularly in their PhD and as a postdoc. But then just sharpening and refining some of those skills in a management context is kind of the most important thing. And anything you can do to accelerate that, whether it's through coaching, whether it's through mentorship, whether it's through training, whatever it is, learning from others, learning from the sort of experience of others can help you get there faster.
Yeah, and I know lots of people as well. There's kind of a sticking point where they want to move into leadership, but there's also a sense of anxiety of where do I start? What's the best approach to do that? Is there any advice that you'd give for scientists looking to move into leadership, maybe mindset wise, about how they can approach that start of their career moving into a leadership position?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing I'd say on this is that it's not the right path for everybody. And I think it becomes a bit of a default route that people follow. And as a result of that, people go into it for the wrong reasons. So like leading teams is at times pretty frustrating and difficult, and you're relying on other people to drive your success, and you know, it can be a really thankless task. It can also be you can also see lots of people grow and develop, and you do things that you can be proud of when you see people overcome challenges and things like that. It can be very rewarding as well. But I think a lot of people do it because they think it's the way that they move their career forward. And that's almost invariably the wrong reason to do it. If you're doing it because you think you're going to earn more money or get more influence, or it's just the right step to take, you're going to get a better job title, you're probably not going to be great at it. Because really, actually, the leaders that are the most effective are the ones that do it because they really want to help people grow, and they really like coaching people, developing people, working with people to help them through challenges, that kind of stuff. So I think if you're not motivated by that, then probably the best advice is to find another route to progress. Because the most effective leaders are the ones that really care about the people that are in their care and in their charge.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really interesting point. It's do you do something because you're good at it as well? I always like that one. Or are you good at it because you really enjoy it? And I think there's almost that element to leadership as well, that you've got to want to do it and enjoy it.
Well, you're not going to be good at it to start with. So people, some people have leadership qualities, but that doesn't make them a good leader. They might be good at bits of it, but there's so many elements that go into leadership that it's very, very, very rare that someone is really good at it to start with. There's normally areas that they need to develop in. And so if you're not motivated by the job itself, if you don't actually want to lead people, you're probably not going to do the work to become good at the things you need to become good at. And, this might be partly why we see lots of people who aren't great leaders but are in leadership positions. Sometimes it's thrust upon them. But nobody's very good at it to start with. So you're not going to get that satisfaction out of it. Yeah. So you've got to be up for the challenge, and you've got to be really interested in helping people to develop their careers in service of a bigger picture, right? Like that's the sort of upshot of it is you can absolutely have way more impact as a leader because you're leading a group of people than you can as an individual contributor in most cases. So it's not to say individual contributors don't have a lot of impact, but if you want to do something that really makes a difference, leading a group of people or a company or a division or whatever it might be is probably the way to do that most impactfully. But it's not for everybody, and some people will not be very good at it, even if they try really hard at it. No one's good at it at the start, but some people, they're just not motivated by the right things. I do think it's a skill that anyone can learn, but if you are doing it for the right reasons.
Yeah. And you've had first-hand experience of both working within companies and building teams from scratch, all to the point now where you're CEO of two businesses. If I was to bring you back, though, to the start, why recruitment and why life sciences?
Yeah, completely by accident on both, actually. So I did an English literature degree. Technically it was English language and literature, but I only did 2 modules of language in 3 years. And to be honest, I got to the end of university and I was really sick of not having any money. So I was trying to find the job that seemed all right, where I could make the most money most quickly. And I had some friends, some people that I'd played rugby with at university who were in the year above me, and some of them were working in recruitment. And this was in 2006, so right before the financial crisis. So this was like the peak of the market.
Yeah.
They seemed to really enjoy it, and they always seemed to have loads of cash. So I thought, all right, well, this is something that looks like it could be a good fit. And I went and interviewed at a bunch of different companies. I was in London at the time, and so there were lots of recruitment companies in London, so I interviewed at lots of them. And I just so happened to join this company called Real, and it was not by design, but they were building a life sciences team. And they were an IT recruitment business. They were recruiting SAS, statistical analysis software programmers, into all sorts of different companies, into banks, into retailers, into a whole bunch of different places. But they'd also been trying to work with pharmaceutical companies, and that was one of the areas that they'd focused on. And they had found it really difficult because the SAS programmers that the pharmaceutical companies needed had to be a specific type. They had to be clinical SAS programmers, so they had to be a specific type. So they basically put someone on that desk to just focus on the pharmaceutical industry. And this person kind of saw that there was a lot more potential there, and that there was a lot of different areas that we could potentially go into. So they started expanding that team, and I was the 3rd person to join the life sciences team, which really, was pharma and biotech at the time. We did some devices and diagnostics and stuff like that, but it was mostly drugs. And I was there for 10 years, and over that 10 years, we grew the life sciences business to 500 people in, I think it was 16 or 17 countries. I went out and built our New York business, and then built our executive search company that was within that. And it was pure coincidence, but I ended up in the right place first time around, and that was how I ended up in this sector. But I developed a real sort of passion for the sector, and I think I spent a little bit of time in oil and gas on that 10-year journey, and then came back to life sciences. I really didn't enjoy it as much, and the main reason was that the people I worked with in biotech were just really passionate about changing the lives of the patients that they were working towards, they were walking towards helping. And that didn't exist in the same way in some of the other industries I looked at. And so, that for me was just where I was supposed to be, and luckily where I ended up.
In the first quarter of 2025, 75% of the $4.1 billion in private biotech investments went to mega rounds, over $100 million each. What does this tell us? Investors are concentrating their capital on fewer companies, the ones that can prove they have the team and capability to deliver. If you want to see exactly what this means for hiring in biotech this year and how to build the kind of team investors are willing to back, download our free ebook, Where Science Meets Strategy, the global blueprint for biotech hiring in 2025, by the link in the description below. Get yours now.
Over that 10-year period, there must have been, challenges along the way too. What kind of kept you focused in that environment and wanting to stay within pharma and life sciences?
Yeah. I tried to leave 3 times before I actually left. So there were certainly some challenges. I think there always is. I think everyone goes through challenges in their career. But, I guess a couple of things. The sector meant that I was really engaged with the work our clients were doing and the work the people I was working with were doing.
Yeah.
But also, the company itself, they really sort of believed in their people and they gave a lot of opportunity to their people. So if you had to perform, but if you did perform, there was always an opportunity to progress. And so, it kind of, for example, when I'd been there for 3.5 years, I was 25 and I was running the New York office that they'd set up. And, very little leadership experience at that point, but I'd done well as an individual contributor. But the guy who was running our Singapore office was the same age as me. The guy who was running our Swiss office was 26, I think. And so there was really this sort of faith in the people that were in the business. So there was just always a new challenge and a new opportunity. And I think my career progressed really quickly being in that environment. And I had to take those opportunities, and so did everyone else. But that was what kept me engaged, really. Whenever I got to the point of getting bored, there was a next step to take.
Yeah. And then what was the tipping point where you decided to become self-employed and open a business in Singular?
Yeah. Well, I think I always had a bit of an itch to scratch with that. The other aspect of the company I was working for was it did encourage you to be quite entrepreneurial in your thinking. And so, I'd set up the business for them in New York and had loads of support. Like, they still paid me a salary, they gave me a team, they gave me all the infrastructure. I had a boss who I could ask questions to. So it wasn't like setting up your own company, but you had that sense of autonomy and that sense of entrepreneurship. And a lot of people who left that company did go and leave to set up on their own. But I think it was quite a big company. And so when I left there, I don't think I felt ready to actually step out on my own. So I went to a smaller business, which I think was sort of 45, 50 people when I joined. And I was there for a couple of years. We grew it to 100, 120, something like that. And part of that role was I had to essentially kind of come in and redesign the part of the business I was running. So it was doing okay, but it wasn't going where they wanted it to go. And when I put a business plan together for it, I kind of had to re-engineer a lot of the way we were working. And just in doing that, I realized that actually I probably could do this for myself. But it was a good company, and so I spent a couple of years there, and then it got to the point where I thought, now's probably the right time. I've built it to a point where I can step away, where we've built some leadership around. I also wanted to leave London, and the easiest way to do that was by setting up on my own. And so, end of 2018, I resigned, and then we officially launched Singular in January 2019.
Fantastic. And that Singular in 2019 is very different to what it is today. So, and I think lots of listeners for this podcast as well, they'd be really interested in what that process of creating a company looks like. Can you talk to me a little bit more about that?
Well, there's lots of different stages of it. So, the first thing was you have to figure out what problem you're going to solve. And this is true for biotech companies as well. I think it's something they sometimes miss, is that a lot of biotech companies and other technology-driven companies start because they've invented something.
Right.
Which, yes, that's a good thing to do, but you've got to then figure out, well, what problem are you actually solving, or what gap are you filling, or what is the reason for your company to exist beyond the fact that you've invented this thing. And so that was really where we started with Singular. There was a couple of things that were essential to it. That at the time, I felt that the drug discovery part of the sector didn't have a huge amount of support compared to sort of the later stages of development and things like that. And part of that was because it was a smaller part of the industry. I think the other part is that it's incredibly complex, as you know. It's incredibly technical, and lots of different technical disciplines coming together. It has its own language and its own terminology. So I felt that there was probably room for some specialist support for that part of the biotech industry in particular. But also, I kind of had come to the conclusion that the challenge that companies were facing when it came to talent acquisition had changed. Like you've got to bear in mind, when I started in recruitment, this was 20 years ago almost, we didn't have LinkedIn, and we didn't have, Facebook existed, but that was kind of it. And I don't think it was like widely available to the public. I think it was still a university thing at the time. So what recruitment businesses were selling, and search businesses, was access to talent. Like, we had databases of 1 million candidates. We had hundreds of thousands of pounds a month of budget for job advertising and things like that.
Yeah.
So we were able to find and contact people that companies themselves couldn't find and contact. And that still today is the way that a lot of companies recruit. They set themselves up to solve that problem by posting adverts and by putting things on their careers page and posting stuff on LinkedIn and that kind of stuff. It's also the way a lot of agencies still recruit, or they're starting to change. But by 2019, that wasn't the problem we had to solve anymore. LinkedIn did exist at that point. So, some people were still more difficult to find than others, but you could pretty much find and contact most people. So I'd been working in executive search, as I said, and what I decided to do was take a lot of the principles that we'd used in our executive search business and just apply them across the board. So while we still did executive search, and we still do today, we apply a lot of the same principles to specialist search up and down the seniority levels. So, it was really about accessing passive talent. It was about creating propositions that really attracted people, because the challenge today is not the access to talent anymore. It's about, there's so much noise about everything, like cold email and LinkedIn messages and advertising and all this kind of stuff. It's not just about jobs. You're competing with everything that's trying to get someone's attention. So really, it's cutting through that noise that's the real challenge that you're trying to overcome. And so that's really where we focused at the beginning of Singular, and that's what we still do today. And that was the problem we set out to solve, those kind of two conjoined problems. So that's the first thing, I think, in setting up a business. And then I think brand is really important, and design is really important, and it's really easy to just look and feel the same as everybody else.
Right.
I spent a lot of time on, like, what color should we use? What should the company be called? Didn't spend much time on the logo, actually. It's just an S in a box. But I was really clear that I wanted it to be clean, and I wanted it to be like simple and easy to remember and that kind of stuff. And so, that positioning is a really big part of it. And then the rest of it, you kind of figure out along the way. You don't ever start out, what you plan when you start out is never what the company ends up as. There's an old Mike Tyson quote where he was being told by journalists, I think he was fighting Evander Holyfield, I'm not sure. But anyway, he's fighting someone. And this guy had basically said he had a plan to deal with Tyson. This was when Tyson was at his prime and like nobody could stop him. And the journalist said to him, "Hey, Mike, he says he's got a plan to deal with you." And Tyson just turned around and went, "Yeah, well, everyone's got a plan till they get smacked in the mouth."
I thought you were going to do the voice, Tom. Come on.
Maybe next time. But it's kind of the same when running a business. Like having a plan is good, but it just, you take it to the market and basically you realize that the plan doesn't work and then you have to change. Right. So, but you just respond to what people need. And we've just all the way through, we've been really focused on what are the challenges our customers are facing and how do we help fix those challenges and which ones can we help them with? I've never really been that interested in what other search and recruitment companies are doing. Because it's only so relevant. I think being obsessed with your competitors means that you're second to everything. Whereas if you're really, really focused on what problems are our customers facing and how can we help them to solve those problems, then you'll probably end up all right if you really do give that some thought. And that's kind of where we ended up moving more into leadership development and culture. High performance culture was that, when after 2022 kicked in and the fundraising market started to turn, a lot of our clients weren't planning to grow, but they were all struggling with the same things. They were struggling with raising money and they needed to do more with less. They needed to extend their runway. They needed to get more productivity out of their teams. We couldn't do much about the money part of it. Like we didn't really have the fundraising connections or anything like that, or the credibility to help with that directly. But we'd done a lot of work on our internal culture at Singular, and I'd spent a lot of time thinking about, well, what actually do the best companies do and how do they develop high performance teams? And we realized that a lot of the stuff we'd done was really applicable to our clients. Right. So we started doing bits and pieces of work with them that weren't recruitment focused, but were about how do you build a more effective team? How do you develop people? How do you align them better? How do you drive more productivity? And that kind of led to this whole culture development piece that led to the academy programs that we do, but also to the founding of Versapia. So it was really all about that, just kind of relentless focus on how do we solve a problem for the people that we work with, that took us to where we are today.
Yeah, and it's from kind of my perspective as well, coming into the company, it really stood out that Singular was a company that was based on a mission opposed to a company based on a function. Right. And that kind of gave that ability to adapt opposed to lots of other companies which kind of get stuck in the mud when conditions change. Yeah. But yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting point. And throughout that,
just on that point, right? So when I left my first company and went to the smaller business, I interviewed with loads of companies.
Right.
I took a week off and I think I had like 25 or 30 interviews because there was so many recruitment companies. And one of the things, and I was meeting, because of where I was in my career, I was usually meeting with the CEO or the owner or the founder, like the person who kind of is running the business and overseeing the business. Sure. And one of the most important questions I would ask all of them is like, look, I know that you have a bunch of people who are money motivated and like you're trying to build this company and this is your exit plan and that kind of stuff. But what's the purpose of the company? Like, what's the mission of the company? Why does this company exist beyond that? And it was amazing to see only a handful of them could actually answer it. And I don't think that's something that's just a recruitment thing. I think that actually a lot of companies never really think about, well, why are they here fundamentally? And when you start thinking about that question, suddenly the sort of world opens up to you around what you could do and where you could take the company and the impact you could have. If you really do think about why you're here, and usually that relates to another group of people, not just you, not why you're here for your own sake, but why you're here for the purpose of the people that you're trying to support and serve. Well, that sort of changes how you think about your business. Now, you've then got to make it commercially viable, and you've got to build the models around it that mean it is a business and not just like a hobby or a solo consulting project. But I think starting with that question is really key, and most companies never actually even ask it, let alone answer it.
Yeah, and I suppose that's probably only going to get more challenging with the speed with AI and technology, how fast that's improving. If there isn't that ability to adapt to a mission and that purpose, It's
Yeah, 100%. I think what used to take sort of 6 to 12 months to build, you can do in a couple of days now. There are tools now like Replit and Lovable. You can build apps without having any coding experience, and you can, even if you have coding experience, you can do it way faster than you could ever do it before because they use AI to go through it. Now, they're not at the level of like an experienced software engineer yet, but they're getting better and better. So. And the technology is advancing so quickly that the actual mechanics of what we do, and when I say we, I mean, I'm not talking about Singular and Versapia necessarily, but companies in general, will continue to change really rapidly. So what I think is essential is to find a sort of unifying purpose that you can continue to work towards and you continue to build a company around. And then you just look at, okay, so all this technology that exists, how can it help us to get there faster? And can it help us get there faster? Because technology is not all the solution to every problem, which is another trap that I think people fall into a little bit. But that unifying direction and goal and purpose is the thing that helps you stay on track, even when the mechanics of what you do change really rapidly.
Yeah. And through kind of all of these experiences that you've had and kind of seeing how this moves forward in the future as well, what have been key lessons that you've learned along the way that have allowed you to kind of find this path?
Where should I start? I think, this won't be a surprise to anybody, but I think the most important lesson I've learned is that you can't do anything substantial by yourself, even with all the tools that exist today. And B, that therefore, if you're going to work with other people, the people that you work with and the environment that you create for those people are the most important things, the most important decisions you can make, the most important things you can spend time on. Because if you get those things right, yes, other things can go wrong, but your ability to overcome things that go wrong will be much, much greater, because there's always going to be things that don't go according to plan. In fact, most things won't go according to plan. Most of what you do when you run a business fails, and just every now and again something works, and you've just got to grasp hold of those things that work and keep doing them until they stop working. And hopefully if you do enough of it, you'll have several things that work, and then they won't all fail at the same time. And so you can gradually expand that. But having the right people in place and having the right environment for them and having a sort of system and framework in which they work effectively is absolutely key. I also think that kind of, I think the other thing I've learned over the years is to try and not get carried away with stuff. It's never as bad as it seems, and it's never as good as it seems. That's the latter probably isn't true. When it seems really good, there's usually something that you're missing. So look for the thing. That's not to say don't enjoy the good times, but there's always something around the corner. So I think just being a bit more long term in my thinking is something that I've tried to develop over the years and still working on. You still get days where you just react to stuff. I think those would probably be the key things. And then I guess the final thing is if you stay really focused on why you're doing what you're doing, not from your own point of view, although having your own goals is important, but from the point of view of the people that you're trying to have an impact for, that you're trying to make a difference to, then that will usually guide you in most situations.
No, that's really valuable. And again, you've had over 100 episodes of this podcast where you've interviewed 200.
Yeah.
Where you've interviewed, CEOs, CSOs, CTOs. Are there any stories over those episodes that particularly stick with you now?
We've had such incredible people on the podcast. We've been so lucky. We've had people like like Jane Osborne, who has an OBE for services to the industry. People like Darren Disley, Paul Peter Tack. There's some people who've been on recently that the episodes haven't come out yet at the time of recording, that they're just incredible people. And people who've just started companies who are doing brilliant things, and people with tons of experience at big companies. Karen Condé Nappe, who's running research at Novo Nordisk, which is the biggest company in Europe. It's been amazing to see the willingness that people have to give back some of their time. I guess some of the things that stick in mind are when I interviewed Paul Peter Tack. This is a long time ago now. One of the roles he'd had in his career was that he was the chief immunology officer at GSK, so he ran all of their immunology programs.
Okay.
And he talked about, in his research teams, they used to celebrate failure when they killed a program. So when they killed a program, when they decided not to progress it, they'd have a party. And it wasn't as big a party as the ones when they were moving forward and the ones when they were successful. But the whole point was that if you killed a program at preclinical or after phase 1 or whatever, actually in the GSK environment, what you were doing was saving 20, 40, 50, $100 million. That was worth celebrating. And it was a difficult decision for the scientists. But I think, everybody talks about embracing failure, but it's much harder to do than it is to talk about, because we want things to be successful, especially things that we've put a lot of work into. So it was really interesting to see an actual mechanism for celebrating failure. I think the other story that always stuck with me was, I mentioned Darren Disley before. He when he was younger, he'd been a semi-professional football player. He'd been on the academy at West Ham and was sort of making his way up the ranks there. And he realised when he was about, I think, 16 or 17, that he was never going to be a Premier League football player. He wasn't good enough. He could have maybe been a professional football player, but it wouldn't have been at the top level. And even that was probably a bit of a question mark. So he just decided he was going to get a PhD and become an entrepreneur instead. And then went and did that. And then his sort of big claim to fame was founding Horizon Discovery and floating that, and then has been involved in lots of other things since then. So just seeing that people can change paths like that. Okay, yes, he was still young, but I think, you kind of sometimes feel that your path is quite fixed. But seeing the twists and turns that people have taken through their careers has been really inspirational. And there's been a ton of others, but the kind of, it's always come back to the fact that the people you work with and the things that you're doing for others are the things that you're going to remember at the end of your career. And it's not what title you had or the salary that you earned or what percentage pension you had or anything like that. It's the people and the impact that are the really important things that people look back on as their careers progress. And I think as well, there's been a ton of people who've talked about being open to opportunity. And I've seen over the years a lot of people whose careers have stalled because they were too scared to take a risk. And you've got to be responsible, and people have other things going on outside of their jobs and things like that. But I think there's a lot of careers out there that have stalled because of fear.
Okay.
And it's a really poor reason to hold yourself back.
Yeah. That sort of leads into potentially my final question here is what one piece of advice would you give to, your younger self off the back of this journey so far?
Yeah, I'll give you the PG version. I think I would my younger self, I would encourage to just be more mindful of how I was interacting with people. So I wasn't a very good leader when I started out. I may not be now, I'm not sure, but I really didn't take to it naturally. I basically got promoted into a leadership role because I was really good as an individual contributor.
Okay.
But I was very focused on myself and like my own contribution and the things I had to do, and I didn't really give enough time to the people around me to help them develop in the way that they should. So like the first couple of people that were on my team didn't do very well, and that was largely down to the fact that I didn't really support them. And I think if I'd realized that earlier, I probably would have maybe not moved quicker, but have ended up with a different approach and got less frustrated and been able to do more. I think it's kind of, you get whatever your capacity, and everyone has different levels of capacity. As you grow a business or a team or an organization, there is a point up to which you can feasibly do everything yourself. And then there's a point at which you just can't, and you just can't work harder or do more hours, or like you can't find any productivity hacks that are going to make a difference or any of that. Like you just need other people to contribute to go beyond what you're doing. Mm-hmm. And I think if you realize that earlier, then you can build a team around that is sort of more effective earlier on as well. And if actually I'd focused early in my career on how to build really great teams rather than I've got to hit this target, I guess I've got to train these people as well, then I probably would have been more effective. So I think, being more conscious of how I was working with the people around me would be the piece of advice I'd give.
Thank you very much. Well, I suppose, do you have any kind of parting messages at all?
Well, I might come and do the odd episode. I haven't decided yet, so it might not be gone forever. But what, for you or for the audience?
For the audience.
Yeah. Look, I think it's a difficult time in biotech at the moment, but the fundamentals of the industry is still strong. I think the science that's being developed is unbelievable, cutting edge, groundbreaking science that's changing the way that we think about biology, changing the way we think about health and longevity and all these kinds of things. And there are still lots of people who need the products that will come from that research and who desperately need it. And there's a real challenge at the moment in terms of bridging the gap between those two things, like what the actual mechanism in the middle is to get those drugs and therapeutics and diagnostics to those patients. But we will figure that out. So it's a difficult time at the moment, but just keep going, keep focused on making a difference to patients. It is already starting to turn around. It's not going to be a rapid recovery from where we are, but it is a recovery and we are moving in the right direction. So hang in there would be the thing I would say, and keep trying to find ways to bridge that gap between the science and the patients.
Fantastic. No, thank you very much, Tom. It's been a pleasure to speak with you and understand a little bit more about your story, even more so than I did before. So it's been a pleasure.
Cheers, Tyler. Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe and share it with someone else you think will benefit. And for more podcasts, videos, blogs and insights, come follow me, Tom Froggatt, on LinkedIn, YouTube, Instagram, Medium or TikTok. See you next time.